Welcome to a presentation of Networks for Training and Development's 20th Employment Support Symposium. Funding for the symposium has been provided by the City of Philadelphia Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services. We hope you enjoy the session.
Playing all the stuff I need to hear. Turn off your video. So they didn't say. That's it. That's what yeah. We are. Oh my God. I like what. Yeah. Right here. Oh. You on the arrow.
right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Shauna Roman, and I'm so pleased and honored to invite you, or welcome you rather, to How Far Can a Needle Carry You? Proudly hosted by Networks for Training and Development. So again, my name is Shauna, and I'm going to get out of your way. I'm so excited. And real quickly, I would like to introduce our capable curator, Tishka Smith, who will come in her own way to share and facilitate this amazing conversation with three world-renowned quilters. I'm excited. I'm a little bit nervous because I'm so excited to be here. Again, you're in for such a treat. So Tishka, it's in your capable hands, and please everyone enjoy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am so honored. Thank you, Shauna, for the introduction. I am so excited to be here today to facilitate this, what should be a very lively and instructive conversation with three, like Shauna said, three internationally renowned artists, activists. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and get us started here with introductions. So glad to see so many new people and people that I know. Thank you for your support. I'm just so excited to be here. So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to How Far Can a Needle Carry You? This conversation is about quilt making for social change. I'm going to be facilitating a conversation with Betty Lee Craft, Dinga McCannon, and Beth Mount. Again, thank you, Networks for Training and Development. Shauna, you and your team have been phenomenal in sharing your platform with me to bring this content to you today. So you've all seen this, this screenshot. This is a compilation of three of the quilts that our artists submitted for promotional purposes. They showed up in the virtual exhibit that was playing as you all were coming in. So glad to have Betty and Dinga and Beth here today to talk about their work. So let me just go ahead and introduce them one by one. Their complete bios are in the Eventbrite invite that you all saw. So I'm gonna just give you an abbreviated version of their bios for the sake of time. So Betty Lee Craft is a textile and mixed media fiber artist, visual artist, educator, and curator residing here in Philadelphia. She blends multiple techniques and processes to create works that blur the lines and boundaries between art quilts, wearable art, sculpture, and installation. Her work is informed by artistic and cultural traditions of Africa and the African diaspora, addressing themes of identity, heritage, symbol, environment, and ritual. She has received numerous grants, awards, honors, has exhibited nationally and internationally. Her art quilts have been published in books by the renowned Dr. Carolyn L. Mazlumi, who is in the audience today. Thank you so much for being here. She is a scholar, historian, and founder of the Women of Color Quilters Network. As an educator, Betty has created opportunities for underserved, under-resourced communities and individuals through interactive, hands-on textile art projects. You can find out more about her on her website, bettyleecraft.com. Next up is Dinga McCannon, who is an award-winning fine artist, muralist, teacher, author, and illustrator, who also currently resides in Philadelphia, PA. She is a native of Harlem, New York, and her body of work is a celebration of women's lives and a window into the history and lived experience of women and African American women in particular. Her works frequently incorporate and juxtapose multiple styles and methods that poetically and generously reframe the canonical aesthetics of history and representation, bringing to the fore latent narratives, experiences, and appearances. By opening up the past and present as sites of competing perspectives and possibility, McCannon extends to us an invitation to reimagine the future. Among other things, she's been featured in several exhibitions at key galleries and museums throughout the world. Her resume is extremely extensive And she's made such an impact on just the African American art tradition in general. She is a founding member of the Weusi Artist Collective and the Where We At Artist Collective. Thank you, Dinga, for participating on our panel today.
Sure.
Finally, we have Beth Mount, Dr. Beth Mount, who you can find on her website, bethmount.org or inclusion.org. She has worked for 45 years with organizations and individuals spanning the globe towards the ideal that every person with a disability can be a valued member of community life. Based in New York City, she runs a consulting firm, Graphic Futures, where she creates and implements innovation projects that transform options for people through personal, organizational, and policy change. Her groundbreaking work, Personal Futures Planning, promotes the positive futures and images of people with disabilities throughout the globe and demonstrates that all of us count and all of us fit somewhere. In addition to her social activism, Mount creates art that complements and defines her unique style of cross-cultural and multi-literate communication. She supports people to create person-centered plans via art, and she creates quilts that help people communicate the spirit and beauty of personal, organizational, and social change. Through her publications and art, Mount weaves together stories, symbols, and patterns of belongings, joys and struggles, and beauty of people who are learning together and creating a more beloved community. Thank you, Beth, for joining us today. So, I want to talk a little bit about the title, just really quick before we jump into the conversation. So, as I was thinking about kind of the title of this talk and where I wanted to go with things, I did a lot of research online because we're in a pandemic and you can only do research online these days. And I came across a video about a quilter by the name of Herdicine Rankin, who grew up in Mississippi, was part of the Mississippi Cultural Crossroads Collective of quilters. And I heard her speak in this video, and I'm going to link to it right now so you can hear in her own words how she felt upon receiving this award from the National Endowment for the Arts. So she talks about...
This is an award that's given every year to about 10 traditional artists in this country.
When I got a $10,000 one, they carried me to the White House. Lord have mercy, I'm at the White House. That's what I'm saying in my heart. But when Hillary Clinton, when she come by me, she was so nice. God, she done like one of my daughters come by me. I wasn't nervous or nothing. I didn't have an idea the quilt would go so far in life. Just thinking about it. How far can a needle carry?
So, you know, when I saw that clip and heard her say those words, how far can a needle carry? It made me think about my grandmother who made quilts and spending time in Southern Illinois, being covered at night with quilts. And I wanted to explore the question of how far can this practice carry you? And part of this conversation will be about that, how far this practice, this medium has carried these three women and their beliefs, their messages, and made such an impact on the art world in particular and on the world in general. So I want to just jump in and start with the first question here. So a needle is defined as a noun, a very fine, slender piece of metal with a point at one end and a hole or an eye for thread at the other, and it's used in sewing. And it's also defined as a verb. Pricks or pierces something, provokes or annoys someone by continual criticism or questioning. And so these pieces that are up on screen right now, we're going to be starting with Betty first, represent how far the needle has done that, has connected pieces of cloth, has brought healing, and has bound up wounds of identity, of not fitting in. And we're going to talk about that today. So Betty, I want to bring you up first with your quilt, which is called the mandala here. Can you talk about why you chose this quilt in response to the question, what does the needle represent? And did you ever envision that something so simple could bring you so far in life?
Well, first of all, thank you and hello to everyone. This quilt is special to me because as far as distance in the world, this quilt took me to South Africa, to Johannesburg, to the International Quilt Africa Conference, which was attended by 51 quilters from the United States, many of whom were members of the Women of Color Quilters Network, along with a cross-section of other South African quilters. And this was organized by Dr. Carolyn Maslumi and also Dr. McDowell, Marsha McDowell. The thing that really impressed me about getting the notice to apply was the fact that I wanted to do something in reference to South Africa because I had been a part of what was going on when apartheid was, in fact, a real thing that was oppressing indigenous South African people. And also, it was shortly after Nelson Mandela had passed. And I felt really a duty to want to do this piece. And when I found out that it was selected and was going to South Africa, of course, I thought I should go too, not just the piece. And I, with the help of friends, had a fundraiser on my birthday because they told me, if you're going to have it on your birthday and let people give you that. So it worked out. I was getting money until I got on the plane. And this piece itself symbolizes the colors of the ANC flag, African National Congress, which was an organization that was helped with the liberation of South African people under the yoke of oppression of apartheid. And Nelson Mandela was a large part of the formation of that organization. And the flag for the ANC colors are black, green, and yellow. So in the quadrants in the center, what you see are many flags that are turned in such a way that the black bands all connect, symbolizing solidarity of indigenous South Africans to liberate themselves from the oppression of apartheid. One thing that was very interesting that I found out in my research was that the yellow in the ANC flag over time had changed shades. I found some that had a mustard yellow. I found some that had a yellow different than the one that you see here, and also something in between. So what I did was I chose the yellow that was the most recent for the 4 quadrants, as well as the one that's in the center between the quadrants. The designs in the outer borders that are zigzags to most people are in fact what I was influenced by in terms of Zulu beadwork. There was a lot of zigzag design in Zulu beadwork, and it happened to be the jewelry there that I liked the most, Zulu and Ndebele. And yes, I did come home with plenty of it because I like accessories. But having those Zulu elements of design surrounding the ANC flag, I just felt it was the proper thing to do. And dividing the quadrants are strips of fabric that have black bands, again, symbolizing the solidarity of African people who were under oppression. Now, from what I was told by Brother Godfrey Sitole, a Zulu, who taught me 4 phrases in Zulu. So when I went there, I was able to say something, and I was able to say them pretty well, enough that people answered me and actually asked me, how did I learn? So he told me that the colors in the flag are this. The black stands for the people themselves, the indigenous people. Green stands for the earth, that which comes from the earth. And the yellow is symbolizing the mineral wealth, which was not under a lot of their control and was being really extracted without them having a share or a say so in the profit. So when I got to Johannesburg and I saw this piece up, it really made me feel very proud to be in this show, because this show was a feature within the larger context of the conference. And the book that you see up now is the catalog. So that was also the name of our show. And it was a very interesting experience, a very moving experience, because not only did we get to see our work up, but we got to see a cross section of other South African people's work up, both indigenous and those whose people had come at another time. And it was a wonderful gathering. There were people from the Women of Color Quilters Network who I had never met that I saw then. One person in particular who's getting an enormous amount of wonderful publicity now, Bisa Butler, was on that trip. And we took a picture together at the Cape of Good Hope, which was really nice. The other thing is going to a squatters camp while I was there. And I'm saying this even though it doesn't have anything to do with the piece, but it has something to do with that experience. So if you're going to a squatters camp, it would be the same as being in a place where there would be immigrants, and the way of life is not an easy one. But being there was something that would make you more grateful for what you already have, and that even at your lowest, you still are very rich in what you have back here. So I was told one morning, early in the morning, that one of the grandchildren of Nelson Mandela came to see that show. We weren't down there, but I have the comfort of knowing that someone from the family came and saw our work. And it was really a wonderful experience, the longest flight I'd ever had in my life.
Right.
And some of the best food. The best food was in the townships, because that's like going home, you know? And I ate a lot. I'll just say, people know that I like to eat different kinds of things. But getting back to the show itself, there were a lot of vendors there who sold all kinds of things for people that quilt. I bought a lot of shwe cloth, and people who are familiar with that cloth know what it is. It's very beautiful prints. And there were a lot of other kinds of things that were there. And I'm not gonna say I lost my mind buying cloth. I lost it as much as my budget would allow. And
that is amazing.
Yeah.
So I wanna make the connection between your quilt that traveled to Africa and the next story that we'll hear from Dinga about her quilt, Jazzmobile, that also went to Africa. It didn't go to South Africa, it went to Liberia, I understand. But Dinga, I want to hear from you about this work that's on screen now. What inspired you, and then the trip that it made overseas because of the love of jazz that is embodied in this work. I know, Betty, you're a huge fan of jazz also, so it's kind of a good segue from your story about your quilt to Dinga's work, Jazzmobile. So Dinga, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. First of all, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I want to just make one point about the needle. A needle,
Yes.
although it's a very little tiny thing, it connects me to all the other textile people in the universe. Because no matter what our form is, at the base of it is a needle, whether it's a hand sewing needle or, as many of us, a machine needle. This particular piece is called Jazzmobile. I created it in honor of an organization in New York called Jazzmobile that gives free concerts all over the city during the summer, featuring some of the best jazz musicians on the planet. Also, another thing that Jazzmobile did for many years is up at Grant's Tomb every Wednesday during July and August, myself and probably 100 other entrepreneurs would set up. They would have music and we would be selling our wares so that we could continue our art form. The amazing thing about quilts is that sometimes they do get to travel. One of my quilts was supposed to go on a trip that Betty went, but my quilt was not selected. However, because I had wanted to go to South Africa for so long, I went anyway. And it was an amazing, awesome experience. Some of my other work has traveled across the United States. This one I was part of the Artist and Embassy program.
Yeah.
And that's how this piece got to go to Liberia. The embassy, they love jazz and they requested something with jazz. And voila, here I got this piece with jazz. Also, I had another piece, the wedding party #2, that went to Belgium. And that was selected because in the middle of the quilt, I used a piece of antique lace. And they loved that because Belgium was known for lace making. Okay, back to Jazzmobile. Jazzmobile, like most of my work, is compiled of a lot of different elements. In the upper corner, I have a traditional quilt square. It's painted. And then this jazz piece here, I found a bunch of fabric on 23rd Street at a store that no longer exists. And it had sequins and it had jazz. Well, it also had my name on it. So I bought I bought the whole thing. And to this day, because this quilt was made 10 years ago, I still have pieces of it and I'm still using it in other jazz themed works of art. Because music and especially jazz has sort of been an ongoing thread in my work. One of the reasons is because as a young artist, I used to have a store, and by the time I finished working in the store, it was like midnight, and the only place a young person could go out at that time was the jazz clubs. And I began going to jazz clubs. And at some point, I started drawing what I saw before me. And over the years, those drawings became quilts. And that's it.
So I want to advance one slide, Dinga, and because I went to the website for the Artists in U.S. Embassy program that this quilt went to, and this was on the website, and it kind of gives a glimpse. Yeah, it gives a glimpse into kind of how this was constructed. So you want to talk real quick about? I know you talked about the elements of it, but in terms of just how you build one of your works. I did some reading and kind of learned a little bit about how you work, but can you walk us through kind of how this was put together on your wall? And I see an iron there, and it's just amazing to be able to get a glimpse. And I was surprised to see this on the site.
I'm shocked. I didn't even know this existed.
I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, and it looks like, because I have a lot of different techniques. It looks like what I did on your left hand.
Uh-huh.
I put that panel together, And then I went to the right side. As you see the figures in white, that's before
Mhm,
I painted them because I do a lot of hand painting.
mhm,
And then this square over here that is traditional, I think I probably did maybe one sort of traditional quilt many years ago,
mhm.
but I didn't care for the form because it was too planned out. I like things to be more intuitive. But occasionally I revert back to it's sort of like a way of honoring those women and the men who came before me who did traditional quilt making. And so they're represented up in that corner. You see a lot of white space here because I haven't quite figured out exactly what I want to go there. I usually start a piece and then I just keep adding and subtracting and adding and subtracting until I'm happy with what I see.
Yeah. And that was something that I heard you say in numerous interviews that I had a chance to either read or listen to or watch online. This was on the website. So it definitely, you know, tells a story, not just about the finished product, which you talked about, but just about your process. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. So I wanna turn things over to Beth to talk about her quilt that she submitted in response to the question about how far can a needle carry. So Beth, I want you to talk about what the quilt on screen right now, Make Your Mark, Be an Everyday Hero.
Oh, so I think the version of how far a needle can carry you, the definition I would ascribe to this piece is how far can a needle provoke people to think differently? And so, and the distance that this quilt traveled is that it hosted a series of stories that ultimately led to an increase in the wages for people who provide direct support for people with disabilities in New York City. So that was a pretty good run for a quilt, and I'll tell the story, a little more about the story. So this piece was made by 32 women, and you can see their hands around the edges, who were direct support workers, direct support professionals in New York City. And it was part of an effort to engage direct support staff to teach the system more about what it means to help people be fully included in community life. And so it was a collective effort to say to a system that wasn't doing a very good job at helping people really be members and belong, if you really want to learn more about how to do this, why don't you try listening to us? And the whole piece is designed to shift the view of direct support staff, to shift it away from that of people just as workers and more towards people as artists, as creative activists in the roles that they are in supporting people. So the first group that came together in New York City, this was in 2021, basically sat in circles and talked together about what they knew about the work and what they wanted to tell other people. You can go to the next slide, actually. This is not that group, but it's another group. And I don't have the original group because that was 20 years ago when we didn't take pictures of everything. You know, that was before the iPhone.
Document.
What happened is that the piece began to travel, and it traveled throughout New York, and it hosted groups of direct support professionals to come together, like this group here, to tell their stories, to develop their stories, and then to bring them to life in performance through storytelling performances that would be given to hundreds of other people. So it was a celebration, it was an honoring, and it was a lifting up of the day-to-day work that people did who are generally often unseen. To me, one of the things that happened that was really important is, first of all, the stories were pulled together into 2 books and 8 storybooks. And it was the individuals themselves were featured in 2 different films about their work and their stories. And here's the needle. Here's the needle is that when the commissioner of the Department of Developmental Disabilities in New York saw the video that featured the direct support workers, he said, "Where did you all find the money to hire these actors?" In other
Oh,
words,
wow.
okay, that's clear to everybody here. Y'all know what's happening, right? Like, he was saying, wait a minute, I thought these were the people who were the problem. And it had a huge impact, I believe, in shifting his perception of who are the people who do the work every day. And he, there, after that, went to the legislature and put forth a platform to raise the wages of direct support. So that's a pretty good run for a quilt, I think. And it's not over yet, because while the wages were raised, they're still not a living wage. So we have a lot longer to go. But for me, I would just add, you could go to the next one. This is a group from Central New York, and this is at the end of their event where they also told their stories. The one thing that I would add about the inspiration for this piece, I'll finish with this, is it was in 1999, 2 years before we made this piece, that I went to the exhibit Spirits of the Cloth that both Betty and Dinga's work was featured in. And of course, Carolyn Mazzalomi had curated that exhibit. But I have to tell you, that exhibit just lit me on fire about a different way of telling stories, a different way of making art, a whole other way to make visible things that are not clear and seen by other people. And so I just wanted to trace the needle. It goes so far back, right? It just really did, was an extension of this wonderful tradition of storytelling.
Thank you, Beth. And that's a good segue into the next question, which is as follows. So all three of you have worked with a variety of materials, a variety of forms, processes in a way that pushed boundaries or continues to push boundaries of art making to create some amazing work. And that's, that's evidenced by, the number of people that have shown up even today to support all of you. And just the record of how far these works have traveled and have changed lives and perspectives. So the question that I want to start Dinga with on this segment is, describe the defining moment where you felt comfortable enough to call yourself a quote unquote quilt maker, even as you were pushing beyond traditional notions of what that meant. So I'm going to advance to the next slide, and Dinga, I'm going to let you talk about the piece on screen, Tribute to Faith Ringgold, who is one of the greats in the tradition of African-American story and art quilt making.
Okay, first, this is Tribute to Faith Ringgold #2.
Number 2, okay.
Yeah, no, the first one is a piece that has an image of a woman, and it was created for Faith, or in honor of her 80th birthday. A group of us, must have been maybe 40 artists, did quilts that had an exhibition at City College celebrating Faith's 80th birthday and her contribution to African-American quilt making and just quilt making in general. Because as you all know, she was able to break barriers that a lot of us that came after her or along with her were able to get through also. First, I've never really considered myself a quilt maker, only because me personally, I didn't want to be pigeonholed into one medium. I consider myself a multimedia, mixed media artist who also deals in cloth. That being said, I think the point is that quilts in general, as far as art is concerned in America, they've always been like the bastard child. They weren't considered art. We were labeled craft artists, which I could never understand because I do both. And I know that the making of a quilt is a lot more labor intensive. It takes a really lot more time than it does to do the so-called fine arts. Now, about this quilt in particular, this was probably one of the first quilts that I got real free with, and I started using a lot of mixed media. In this quilt, there is cotton, there's chiffon, there's this strip of fabric that has African people on it that I found on 125th Street at a sewing store that also no longer exists. At the time, it was probably the early 90s, and just finding a piece of cloth like that was just, to me, a miracle. And consequently, I bought all of it, and I still am using pieces here and there. It looked to me like a piece of fabric that I would have printed. Also, now in this quote, on the bottom, this is plastic, shrink plastic. Then I put beads, and then I have paper, and then I have metal, and then I have string. And it was me trying to push past the barrier of a quilt just being fabric, colors, to a quilt being anything that you could imagine it could be, anything made of fiber. Yeah, and it's also.
I want to comment. I want to make a comment real quick.
Okay,
As I was doing some research on your work, you had a quote that struck me as I was looking at this particular piece. Why does it have to be square?
Yeah, as a I guess myself as an artist, I'm always challenging what you're supposed to do and what things are supposed to be. And I like being free. So sometimes my work does result in a square or a rectangle. But a lot of times, why am I stopping at the border? Why do I have to stop there? Why can't things be more organic? And as you see, this is definitely more organic.
Yeah.
And
so how did you know this one was done? I know you've said in interviews that you kind of know intuitively when it's done. When did you know that this was finished?
It's done a day before, or maybe the night before, or maybe the morning of it's supposed to be somewhere. That's when it's finished. Because I can keep working on stuff forever. But you do have to stop at a point. And a lot of my work has been for different exhibitions with themes or exhibitions, and there's a timeline.
Right.
So more than likely, I don't know why I can't get out of this. The night before it's supposed to be someplace, I'm still finishing up. I can't seem to rid myself of that habit.
Okay.
So perhaps some of the best things happen at the last minute. I don't know.
I love that.
What happens?
Love that. Is there anything else that you want our audience to know about this particular piece on screen before we move on to Betty's work in response to this question about pushing boundaries?
No, I think that's it. And it definitely suits the title. I pushed a lot of boundaries here. And
it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. All right, Betty, you're up next.
Okay.
On screen. Camouflage, a means for survival. I had a question for you about this. I know you know that this was created in 98, but I found somewhere that it referenced 1992. So let's talk about that. When did you actually build this piece?
And I'm glad you used the word build, because that's exactly what it was. This piece was made the year of the celebration of Columbus 500 years of having, quote unquote, discovered things. And I was working with Julio Lopez, who was the gallery director at Taller Puertorriqueño, which is the cultural hub for activities in Philadelphia that concern the community that is Latina or Latinx, whichever term is the correct one. And this piece, first I'll say how it came about. I was thinking about the gathering of artists, both African American and Latina, who Julia pulled me in and asked me to be a co-curator with her. Me gathering the African Americans and she gathering the Latinas. and we were to address our feelings about that quincentenary celebration. And we met for a year. All the artists met for a year. They designed each page of their catalog, and we talked about the issues and planned the show. So it was the first time the two groups of artists, and there were at least 40, it might have been more, came together to do anything like that. So the piece that I made is a compilation of uniforms that are backed with United States camouflage. And all of these uniforms came from a store that's no longer around in Philadelphia called I. Goldberg, which had uniforms from around the world. And I chose uniforms from each of the countries that was responsible for the transatlantic slave trade, or countries who participated heavily in the colonization of Africa. So there's either one side of a pair of pants, front of a jacket, side of a jacket. I even put an LA County Jail shirt there because I saw that as present day slavery, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a praise song. Camouflage, a Means of Survival, is a praise song that actually celebrates the genius of enslaved Africans who were taken to many parts of the world and their ability to be able to hold on to their culture in the way of worship in various forms of worship, martial arts, language, music, art forms, ritual, under the disguise of something else. Because if a person was enslaved, the idea was to knock all out of you that you came with culturally to make you obedient, if I may use that word. So in this piece, you will see some pictures of saints, because there were certain groups like the Yoruba from Nigeria, who were able to find similar qualities in some saints that parallel some of the forces of nature within their sphere of worship. So a lot of that is there. The red handprints are symbolizing those things that happened during the quote unquote discovery, which were bloody. The Taino Indians, who were the forebears of Puerto Ricans, if you can think of someone's hands being cut off because they weren't bringing in enough gold. This is an emotional piece. And I was emotional when I was making it. Up at the top, you see a berimbau, which shows how Brazilian African descendants used music and rhythm to create capoeira. The one that I favor is Capoeira Angola, because I feel it's the more traditional form. And those instruments were used to warn those who were practicing when the plantation owner was coming. So they would change the rhythm so that the movements would become a dance. Mm-hmm. So they can't tell that you are practicing a fighting form, which held off the Portuguese for 100 years in a place called Palmares, which was a runaway maroon community within Brazil. On the floor is an altar, which celebrates Native Americans here in the United States who had to make deep concessions, which I don't need to go into the whole history of that. Those who know, and those who don't, you should find out. There is a picture of a Kiowa woman there with chocolate skin, showing the intermixture of what happened when those who ran away were taken in by the Native Americans who sheltered them. My grandmother's picture is above the Kiowa woman, as she told me her mother had a lot of Cherokee blood. And there is a candle and a glass of water there for the ancestors, as well as soil, cedar chips, and pine boughs, referencing Native Americans' constant calling of the earth as the mother.
So when you submitted this quilt to me, the image of this installation is actually an installation. You mentioned that it was part of the Spirits of the Cloth exhibit, and I'll pull that up on the next slide here. Beth mentioned seeing this exhibit. So talk about that experience real quick before we move on to Beth's second quilt in response to the question.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief because that was an evening that was unforgettable. First of all, it was my first time exhibiting with the Women of Color Quilters Network. So I was really surprised when that particular piece was chosen because I knew it was not the regular quilt. As I told someone, this isn't the kind of piece that will match your couch. This is the kind of piece that may eat the couch because it was very heavily political. And the fact that I was in this book, that actually two other pieces of mine made it to the book, but in smaller photographic format.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just floored by the fact that Dr. Mazlumi really liked that piece and chose it. And because it had the floor element, when it was packed up to travel, there was someone that was standing over me taking photos of every step. They made a book. And that book traveled with the piece wherever it went so people would know how to put it together. And I was lucky enough to get a Windows of Opportunity grant from the Leeway Foundation that paid for me to go to Washington to the Renwick Gallery. That really floored me when I found out it was going to the Renwick. Wow. They had a motion sensor over my piece. If you got too close to it, there would be an alarm. I also went to the Mint Museum of Art and Design in North Carolina where it traveled, and I went to several other venues after that, but it was a groundbreaking show because nothing like this had been seen before. The line was all the way down the street, and I was told that Quincy Troupe stopped for a while in front of my piece. I'm just sorry that I wasn't there to be able to get some commentary from him. And this was pre-selfies, so that wasn't happening. This to me was like the breakthrough moment of me having my work in a show that mattered, and not only mattered, but was in a book that there were 22 copies in the Philadelphia system in the library. You can't find one of those copies today.
Wow.
They were, what can I say, loved out of the library and didn't make their way back. But if you go online, there's still a few copies around because this is becoming a collector's item.
Yeah. Thank you so much. You know, in the sake of time and wanting to give you guys an opportunity to dialogue with each other and our attendees, I'm going to let Beth speak to her quilt, which is now on screen, Lives of Distinction, All of Us Count, and all of us fit somewhere. And once she's given her take on how this quilt speaks to the question of breaking boundaries, we then will shift to a period of Q&A. We're going to try to make this full presentation available. There are actually two other questions that you all submitted quilt images to speak to, but you know, for the sake of time, we're probably not going to be able to get to that and have time for Q&A. So Beth, on screen is your quilt here. Can you talk us through it and how it addresses the question of breaking boundaries?
Sure. So first of all, I just want to say that show, that exhibit, and that book, Spirits of the Cloth, I just go back to it over and over again because it was so significant and is such a treasure. So thank you to all of you who were on this call that were a part of that. Like that exhibit and as a result of what I was learning about story quilting, this piece, Lives of Distinction, was made together with 40 young people who were supported by an agency in New York City. JobPath is the name of the agency, who believes that every person has a distinctive place in the community and that economic development is at the heart of more of what's possible for every one of the individuals that's supported by the agency. So each of the figures represents one of the individuals that's supported by JobPath, many of who I knew when they were in high school and had a chance to help support people around them to think about their life after high school. And the piece was designed to help compile their stories. So it's the cover of a book. And also, as you can see, if you just go to the next slide for a minute, and then we'll come back, that the piece was generated by people making their own vision boards. So this is something that we've tried to incorporate into helping people think about what matters and what is important to them in their future, by not having professionals design what is going to be important, but supporting the individuals to source what matters to them. And I look back at this picture, which was taken more than 15 years ago, and I see people that I knew when they were in high school who are still working. Todd is working in a law firm. Keith is working in a music industry. Rita works in a coffee shop. And so making this piece together, telling the story about employment, real jobs for people who have intellectual disabilities, and supporting people to not only make their own stories, but also tell their own stories, really had an impact on people seeing employment differently. The other thing to just say about why I chose this piece for when it shifted my perception of myself as a quilt maker is, you can see for me, a lot of why I started making quilts, honestly, for me, they were like living bulletin boards, because I travel from group to group, and rather than we were either making them together or they were traveling to help people tell their stories. So what that meant is they were often just kind of thrown over a coat rack or on the floor, or, we all been there, right? Where things are jerry-rigged and we've got them hanging here and there. And this piece was the first piece that was chosen by the Telfair Museum in Savannah to be featured in an exhibit about story quilts called Journey to the Beloved Community. And that was the first time that I had ever seen that quilt and 8 others of those that I had made up on a wall, right, in a museum, because they get really tall. Like this one is 7 feet tall. And there's no place even in my apartment where I can see them when I have to take them down to the laundry room and get up on a table to start to see them. And even then, it's not the same as seeing it, in an exhibit hall. So, it was like, that's okay. This is not just a bulletin board that I'm schlepping around, and that it's more than that, right? And in that exhibit, Journey to the Beloved Community, that was the backdrop for 2 years.
Wow.
Local people talking, thinking, making pieces that help them describe what beloved community meant to them. So it was really cool to see how a piece from one part of the world, in this case, New York City, could travel to another place altogether and serve as a backdrop for people telling their stories and making meaning of what was important to them.
Beautiful story. And I can attest to just the scale of your work. I remember encountering your quilt back in 2013 when you were here for it was a pop-up exhibit sponsored by and hosted by Networks. And I remember seeing your work for the first time and just going, oh my God, this is scale, and the vivid colors and the imagery all coming together. I mean, it was like a magnet drawing everyone to it. Throughout that evening, we were all together, sharing our work and sharing our stories. So it's interesting to hear you talk about how you have to manage these pieces when we're not looking at them hanging on a wall. I mean, it's just incredible. Just, the backstories that I'm hearing from all 3 of you. So what we're going to do at this time is we're going to open things up to our audience. And the light has been flashing from the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I think we've got some questions. I'm supposed to be getting some help here. Let's see. A lot of love in the chat, ladies, a lot of love. I'm going to just read here. This is so fascinating and beautiful. From Teresa Myers to Dinga. My husband and I love that Jazzmobile quilt. Thanks. We got someone, Cassie Crum from Pittsburgh. Betty, Chris Rude says, I used to shop at I. Goldberg. And there was another comment here, Betty, regarding the camouflage piece, the installation. I love this piece and your knowledge of martial arts. Using a cane in the field was a way to practice stick fighting techniques. Mm-hmm. So we got a question here from Stacy. It says, do you have any suggestions for a quilter who would like to make artistic quilts on uncomfortable subjects, such as incarceration or violence? The art on the quilts is not cute, rather blunt and graphic. In general, art that is not welcome in most forums or galleries. Thank you, Betty Lee Craft. I love your statement that this quilt won't match your couch.
Well, can anyone go first?
Yeah, I would. First of all, the world is changing. Subjects that were uncomfortable yesterday are in vogue today. So if you're making those type of quotes, keep doing it, because we all have something to say. And obviously you want to say what you're seeing through your eyes in your art form, so go for it. Sooner or later, you'll find an audience that will accept it and embrace it.
If I can piggyback on that, I would like to say that, yeah, it's more acceptable now, but when I did that camouflage piece in 1992, it was a controversial piece. And I'll tell you quite frankly, I was expressing myself and I didn't care what anybody else thought. And if you're approaching an uncomfortable subject, you have to go with how that subject is making you feel in the way that you want to put it out. Because there is a piece that you saw earlier, that is my latest one, and it is dealing with the uncomfortable subject of lynching. It took me a while to get to that piece because it's a very visceral subject for me. And I wanted to do it in a way that didn't involve hanging bodies in the piece. So you find your way with it. You know, look for what resonates from the subject matter in you visually. If you're a sketching person, do some sketches. I'm mental, so I'm looking at it in my mind's eye, and then it comes forth with whatever materials I have, because that piece was made with all materials that I had on hand. And you have to just do it. Now is the time, because these uncomfortable subjects are now part of everyday conversation. And if you're going to do it at all, you need to start now and don't worry about what anyone thinks, just do it.
The other, another thing that I would just add is that part of times changing is that there are so many more ways to get the images out into the world, right? So between Instagram and Facebook, and you don't have to have it chosen, right? You don't have to wait for an outside authority to decide that this is a piece that needs to be seen. And so there's so many more venues for people to make their work as uncomfortable and truthful as it might be visible.
Well, that's a good point, Beth. And I'll ask the three of you to speak more on how you've been able to use social media to share your work, to continue the conversations about the themes and the subjects that your work touch upon. How have you been using social media, and how have people responded to you in this sort of digital age where, a lot of what happens online? Because I know, Beth, you're active on social media. So can you speak to that?
Oh, yeah, I guess it's a continuation of what I was just saying, which is I think what we all share is a desire to make visible things that are not seen, would not be seen otherwise, unless we show up in some way. And art is a doorway for stepping through discomfort and into a new awareness, right? So if we see ourselves as artists with that as a challenge, then every one of these venues is a doorway and can be, right? So once again, what amazes me, and of course, the problem with social media is that you can get so distracted that you don't spend time doing your work, right? So we all deal with that, right? But it's amazing to me what you can find, like how much inspiration there is, for example, on Instagram. You curate your feed, right? You're not watching everything. You're following your favorite artists, the ones that have touched you and lift you up and create images that resonate with you. And it's inspirational. It's a discovery. It's a discovery process, right? So I think I'm amazed at the moment. And COVID added a whole other element to it, right? Like here we are doing this, right? And none of us would have been doing this necessarily even 9 months ago. So we have new ways to see into each other's worlds. I think that's exciting. I think that is relevant as long as you still have time to get to the studio, right? That's the challenge.
COVID.
Social media sucks time. It's a time suck.
So this is Rosa. Hi there. I put this in the comments in the chat, but I'm one of the behind the scenes folks from Networks. But I had a comment question for you amazing, wonderful artists. And I also wanted to open this up to others who are participants here, that if you'd like to unmute yourself and speak, now's the time you can do that as well, or put it in the chat. My question or whatever, I'm originally from Pennsylvania. I don't live there anymore. And family's roots, my father's family's roots are very German, Dutch, strict, that kind of stuff, and Pennsylvania Dutch. And so I studied quilt making with the Amish for a while. And while their quilts are amazing and gorgeous, they just didn't do it for me because they're too linear in my world and very structured, very traditional formats. You have to do, either a wedding ring quilt or this style quilt in certain colors and all that. And your art is just so amazing. And I, seen Beth's quilts for many, many years and have been just so fascinated. And I'm just curious, how many other cultures and groups use quilting for storytelling that maybe I'm just not aware of? And why the heck did the Pennsylvania Dutch and others get just so linear and traditional about it? It feels like a loss in some ways for them.
The nice thing about making quilts is that there's room for everybody. There was a time, I believe, when the traditional quilt makers weren't too pleased with those of us who were art quilt makers. However, over the years, that has dissolved. The Amish probably make their quilts the way that they do because that's the society out of which they come, and that's the form that they embrace. And it's revered the world over, but it's not the only form. There's lots of forms. One of the reasons I work in textiles and in quilt making is because I have an unlimited palette of expression. I can use anything. I can be traditional. I can be as far out as you can be, and anything in between.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, sure, please.
One of the things that I always like to say is that I have a great respect for the traditional forms of quilt making because that would be the first kind that I had seen and been introduced to. And the respect for those who came before laid the ground for those of us who are departing from certain ways of making. Because I know for myself, when I got to a point where I had a breakthrough and I wanted to start dyeing and painting my own cloth so that I knew this was a piece of work that was original and could be considered art. And that was the thing for me, was to, okay, what do I have to do to have my work be worthy of exhibition in spaces that are normally reserved for quote unquote fine art? What was said earlier in reference to quilting being almost like a stepchild, I always took offense to that And I had a conversation with an artist friend of mine, a male friend, and I was showing him something, and he said, "Oh, but that's not a painting." And I'm like, "Okay, we're friends, and I'm trying to keep it like that. How can I get him to understand?" So this is what I did. I said, "What is your substrate that you paint on every day?" "It's canvas." I said, "You use it every day?" He said, "Yes." I said, "I'd like to inform you that canvas is a textile and you use it every day." I said, "Granted, you'd be able to paint on some other substrate, but textile is what you use." So I just wanted to drive the point home that he was involved with textiles in his everyday creativity. Now, I was glad it didn't have to go further than that because I had other examples ready for what didn't turn into a debate, thank goodness, and we're still friends.
That's a great story.
No, I think the art world in general for many years, and thank God it's changing. Like I said, we're sort of like the bastard of the art world. And I think it's probably because it was women's work and it had less value. And like I said, also would be thrown into the category of craft, which is probably the wrongest thing anybody could do because look at Betty's quilts, look at Beth's quilts. This is art, A-R-T.
Yes.
And thank God the putting us in the closet, we're out now. Quilting has finally, and quilt makers are finally coming into their own as any other artists.
Yeah.
Well, I would add this aspect as well that I think is shifting maybe not only as African-American art becomes so much more valued and appreciated, but also as the voices and the presence of women are, accelerating at this moment, I think that our images as a culture of creative genius is often associated with the one person doing their solo thing and having a lot of fame and money from that. And I think that there is another kind of creative genius that we all try to practice, which is collective, right? That there's a kind of wisdom and genius that comes from working together with groups. And that's another thing that story quilting enables you to do, I think uniquely, right, as a medium that whether people are working with paper or scraps or that it's so well suited for the collective engagement. And that's probably a way that women have been creating culture forever, right? But finally, we have a little more validity for that.
Well, that's a good segue into the question, as a number of people asking about the quilts, the pieces behind each of you. So Beth, speaking to the idea of collective creating, co-creating, can you talk about the Wisdom Maker flags behind you?
Okay, sure. Just briefly, so this is an initiative that began this year once COVID hit, which involved engaging a number of people and talking and thinking about the images that were helping to carry them through this time. And so there are about 20 different people involved in making them. They're making them in sets of 5. They're kind of in the Tibetan flag tradition, although they're a little bigger than that. They're 13 inches. And some of them are collaborations, like this is one of Dinga's pieces that, by the way, that we talked about, right? So you don't go ripping off people's stuff for your own. Laura James is over here and we collaborated on this one, right? So you don't go ripping off people's stuff, but many people that are working on these have never sewed at all. They've never created or made anything, right? And so people are helping each other with whatever skills are needed to bring them to life. And we've got about, I'm looking down the wall, we have about 60 that have been made and about another 40 to go. And, at some point, it'll be an installation. I hope that'll be part of the story of how we got through and what people did. to keep themselves and each other animated and alive and healing in this time.
So Dinga, what's behind you? What works are behind you? Can you talk about those?
See if I could. This piece over here, that's called the Sisters Mask. And I did this because in looking at lots and lots of masks, I've noticed that they were sort of like male-centered. So I decided to create one in homage to women. So that's what she's about. This piece over here, I created for a show that I had called Global Explorations. It was a show about my travels.
Mhm.
And this piece was on the way, hold on, I gotta get on the road to meet Tom Feelings in Guyana, South America. That happened in 1971. Myself and 6 other artist buddies of mine went to Guyana, South America, to go to a festival called Carafesta. And in addition to that, Tom Feelings was rewriting their entire, or not rewriting, illustrating the entire books of the schools in Guyana. I assumed that what happened was he wanted to make them more diverse, because I'm sure being under England, they probably had the same Dick and Jane that we had. So Tom was there to do that. I never met Tom there. I met him afterward. This particular quilt is about me. We tried to go to Suriname, and on the way to getting to Suriname, I had to ride on a motorcycle, and we were also going to a party. So I had on this long white flowing dress. And even though that was 50 years ago, I can never forget how I must have looked in a long white flowing dress on the back of a dirt bike motorcycle in the woods of Guyana.
I love that. I love that. Thank you. So Betty, can you tell us what's behind you, which the story behind the piece that's hanging behind you?
Sure, but first I have to comment with Dinga. I need to hear about your Guyana trip because my maternal grandfather was from Guyana, from Buxton. So we need to talk. The piece that's behind me is called In the Family, Documents of Sadie Artis Wills, who was my maternal grandmother, responsible for putting the first needle and thread in my hand and always recognizing that I had creative spirit in me. The documents that are here are actual inkjet replicas of copyright forms that she made for a label for a hair product that she had originated. And it was called World's Wonder Scalp and Tether Salve. She made it up downstairs. It was my job to stir the pot while she dropped this and that in it. And then it was my job to take those labels and wet them and put them on the tops of the containers that the hair product went in, and then take the knife and kind of scrape off the extra. She would take these things around to the local beauty shops and they were buying it left and right. And I realized, she was helping to bring income into the house. So the reason that I chose that is because I found these documents and I kept them. I said, I'm going to do something with them, because anytime I do something like this, it is a matrilineal praise song for those people on my mother's side. And there are those on my father's side, which I have not gotten to yet, to keep their name alive, to honor what they have given me, because these women were doing this work before I came along. My grandmother's mother was a professional dressmaker. And she is actually up here. I don't know if I can get the screen so that you can see.
Yeah.
This is my grandmother as a very young woman. And whenever I put her photograph in something, it's remembering that which she nurtured in me. I'd like to say that the borders and these areas were hand dyed by myself, and these other dividing strips and the ones surrounding my grandmother were from fabric that I bought when I was in Ghana. And like Dinga, and I'm sure Beth as well, there are fabric that I still have that I know may be 30 years old. And I keep every little piece because it finds its way into something.
Yeah. Love that.
Oh
And
yeah,
that's
the colors
that's
that are there are her favorite colors. Sorry.
your grandmother's, right?
Yeah, she liked a color. She called this color or this one orchid. She had these beautiful names for colors. Something that was a dark beige, she called it ecru. And then I came to find out later on that, you know, in the fashion industry, they know what ecru is, but she was using that kind of terminology around me. So it sunk in.
So we got about 5 minutes remaining. And so I want to invite you all to give us some closing thoughts for the audience. One takeaway that they should remember from this experience of having you all together. So can you start, Dinga?
Yeah, we're all living history. I think what you can take away from this is just the variety and the wonderful work that we create, and there's hundreds of others like us. You may not see their work, but there's a lot of people in America, a lot of Black women, white women, Spanish women, who are quilting and who are making statements about what's surrounding them, about what's going on. Also, to the young artists out there, you have no excuse. The only way to succeed as an artist is to work very, very hard, extremely long hours. A lot of times you are not going to get paid. But I look at quilt making as the longest love affair I've ever had. You know, when you fall in love, you do things that it's like Superwoman you become. You do things you wouldn't think about doing. But because you're in love and you have that intense energy, you find ways to get your creativity out there, or to get your creativity at least out of your heart onto some kind of tangible form that you can share with the rest of the world.
Wow, thank you. Who wants to go next?
All right, I'll go next.
Okay.
I would say to young artists, one of the things you should ask yourself if you really want to pursue this is, are you willing to still do it when you may not feel your best and when money may not be there? And if you are still able to call up your creative spirit under adverse circumstances, then maybe it's something that you should pursue, but it should be something that you're willing to do under any circumstances, because sometimes that is what will be presented to you and you have to come through anyway. If you're a procrastinator, you know, you have to find a way to work around that, you know, because my thing was when I wanted to procrastinate, I would think about the fact that my great grandmother had to use a treadle machine where your feet pump to make the needle go. And I'm saying all you have to do is flip a switch, you know. And I'd also like to say that this quilt can be found in the book called Visioning Human Rights. And Dinga's piece was also in that book, and it was the human rights tenets as put forth by the United Nations, the book also authored by Carolyn Maslumi, which was part of a traveling show. The other thing, for those who are really serious about this, find yourself an intellectual property attorney that you can call on if something goes left. I have one, but I don't use her often, thank goodness, because it's very expensive. But I like to know that she is there. And you need to be able to document your work in such a way that you don't have to worry about people ripping it off. I don't have any of my work on Instagram as yet. But if I do, there'll probably be a watermark, or it'll be so small that if you try to blow it up, it'll pixelate ungodly. So be aware of the copyright issues surrounding making art and get familiar with them.
Wise words. Thank you. And I'm someone who has a lot of my work out there, so I'm always thinking about that. Thank you so much, Betty, for sharing those additional insights. Beth, do you have any closing words to share?
I would just say that all people have wisdom and stories to tell, and that this art form lends itself more than any other that I know of to help and support anybody who we take the time and make this space and support to bring their story to life. And so, don't over process doing that, just do it. You can use trash, you can use, you train your whole family to be sure that anything that they think they're about to throw away, they don't throw away, they bring it to you first. Right? We've all got everybody trained, like, don't throw anything away, excuse me, like, put that in the bin, let me cut it up. I mean, my son, when he was growing up here, used to hide things, that he was afraid I would start cutting them up if he hadn't worn them. But,
oh, wow.
The point is that you don't now in this day and age, there's this huge industry around all this, but we all started quilting before that industry existed. You just made stuff out of whatever you could find, right? And I mean, it was simple, felt in your old clothes and so forth, and so just make things, give yourself and give other people the time and space to tell their story and bring it to life.
Because that's really what it's all about, telling stories and finding the medium that works for us to do that and to connect with others. Thank you all so much for being a part of this, agreeing to be a part of this, and working with me to stage this really wonderful, wise, rich conversation about quilt making, social change, sustainability, having a vision, bringing in others, collective co-creation. All these things I think have resonated with our audience, who I also want to thank for hanging out with us today. Thank you so much, and stay safe. Oh, Betty, you're holding up. Who's that?
That's my grandmother.
Yeah.
The one that was in the quilt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In case you couldn't get close enough.
Yeah.
There she is.
And this particular quilt image is in the virtual exhibit. We're going to find a way to make sure that people can access that after today. Thank you again. And I'm going to turn it back over to the Networks team.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of today's amazing event. Betty, Dinga, Beth, Tishka, you did an amazing job. I was taking notes. I was holding back tears. I was thinking about my own family background and experiences I've had. So thanks so much, and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shauna.
And we need part two.
The Networks team would like to thank you for attending this session. We hope you've enjoyed it.